A unified society cannot exist if people feel dispossessed, deprived, disenfranchised, and driven to the margins. They have no stake in the society, no part of the society's success, no slice of the pie, no justice, no peace. That's how revolutions are triggered.
And now, The Edwin Black Show. Sponsored by the books of Edwin Black, available on Amazon and at booksellers worldwide. And now, here's Edwin.
Welcome to the Edwin Black Show. I'm Edwin Black, investigative journalist and historian and author of IBM and the Holocaust, War Against the Weak, Financing the Flames, and many other books. If you like what this show is doing, tell a friend, subscribe for passwords at theedwinblackshow.com. We're happy to have solidarity this episode from such fine national organizations as Stand With Us and the Jewish News Service, JNS. It appears we have a triple-digit viewership again today, hailing from across America. I see strong viewership as always in Florida, Michigan, Massachusetts, Illinois, but today also South Carolina and Texas, plus Canada, Israel, and the UK. The Edwin Black Show is growing globally. We speak frankly, without partisanship, to a fragmented world seeking better understanding of our tormented past, our present very, very tense, and a future still quite uncertain. Please get over to the YouTube channel and subscribe to the Edwin Black Show and hit that notify button. Now for today's unhappy episode, assessing how our divided nation continues to divide and wondering out loud just how bad can it get. The moment we all trepidatiously awaited, the January 20th inauguration of President Joe Biden, has come and gone. He spoke of unity, healing the wounds, and binding together the two halves of what he called our uncivil war. President Biden used some of the identical words I've been using for almost 2 years. Said Biden, quote, "We must end this uncivil war that pits red against blue, rural versus urban, conservative versus liberal," close quote. He even warned against distrusting those who don't get their news from the same sources that you do, close quote. That last bit is a supreme acknowledgement that what used to pass for a free press is now the chief instigator of hate, fear, and repression in our country. It's the media. So did Biden inaugurate the healing this country needs? Almost everyone I have heard says his words were empty rhetoric and an utter failure. The ripping apart of the nation continues at an even more accelerated rate, spurred on by politicians and media allies on all sides. One half is intent on revenge against 75 million Trump supporters amid a drumbeat of rejection and derision toward Biden from supporters of the former president. This divided nation is headed toward a historic bifurcation. Consider what happened in the 48 hours or so before the inaugural. CNN aired an interview with Democratic House member Steve Cohn, who had the audacity to say that because only 20% of white males, and most of the National Guard was white males, and therefore only 25% of them voted for Biden, that all National Guard need to be politically vetted. These are the guys sleeping on the floors to protect the Capitol. Texas Governor Abbott publicly objected to his Texas National Guardsmen being slandered. During the week, the media amped up its talk of physical repression of half the country. Eugene Robinson of the Washington Post said on MSNBC, quote, "There are millions of Americans, almost all white, almost all Republicans, who somehow need to be deprogrammed. It's as if they are members of a cult," close quote. Katie Couric said, "This country needs to, quote, reprogram Trump voters, close quote. A PBS attorney now fired was recently caught on videotape saying he wants to take away the children of Republicans and confine them in re-education camps. Another cable news interview says the deprogramming of millions of Trump voters might take many years. I have 10 or more examples that are replete with the demonization of 75 million Americans as cultists, racists, and this new pseudo-slur, nativists. Biden himself blew that dog whistle when he proclaimed the, quote, ugly reality that racism, nativism, fear, and demonization have long torn us apart, close quote. Almost uniformly, those words by Biden were taken by Republican groups and media that I monitored, not as healing, but a further stigmatizing of 75 million Americans. The left-wing media saw no bounds in their revenge momentum. Forbes warned companies that the magazine might investigate any firm that was foolish enough to employ a Trump staffer. Here's a startling jump towards Soviet-style repression. More than 500 figures from the publishing world have signed a pledge and petition entitled No Book Deals for Traitors, demanding no Trump administration figures be granted a book deal. The signatures include people who openly list such affiliation as Random House, Cambridge University Press, Oxford University Press, Macmillan, and even Harlequin, the romance people. Whoever thought you would use the names Harlequin and Oxford University Press in the same sentence? Speaking as a man who, for the past 50 years, has published more than 200 best-selling editions with the biggest and smallest publishers on earth, the most honest and the most devious, it's hard to find a bigger bunch of phonies and hypocrites than in the publishing industry. But I never thought they would stoop to this type of Stalinist collective censorship. Just a few hours before Biden took the oath, CNN's Jake Tapper said of Trump, quote, "You think that he couldn't get any more disgraceful? Well, just give him a few hours." Dana Bash said he looks small. CNN continues to try to get cable companies to disconnect Fox, OAN, Newsmax. The angry war within the media is something I have never seen. Cancel culture is increasing exponentially. My Pillow has just been canceled by Bed Bath & Beyond and also Kohl's, both chains on the same day because the pillow maker's owner supports Trump. Biden supporters are carefully tracking DC lobbying and law firms to see if they're hiring former Trump officials and confronting any such hiring agencies online. Yet despite the threats, the revenge quest, the demonization, the threats of reprogramming and deplatforming, some 90% of Trump's 75 million supporters remain steadfast in their belief that the election was stolen and/or remain loyal to Trump and ready to vote him back in. This according to numerous polls from Fox to NBC News. The other half of this national tearing in two is courtesy of Fox News and the other MAGA media, continuously proclaiming yesterday, all day, every few minutes, that Biden could not heal the country if he was immediately signing 17 executive orders to reverse the issues that were important to the Trump base. This includes stopping the border wall to keep our country safe, the Keystone XL pipeline to keep our country energy independent with 833,000 barrels per day of Canadian oil, and rejoining the Paris Climate Accord, which has highly questionable efficacy and dubious economic strictures, and more importantly, undemocratically involves unelected foreign governance. I say this as a lifelong advocate for environmental justice back when the term was unknown. The drumbeat of conservative antagonism continued all day on Fox, the other MAGA media, and also the pro-Trump chat groups that I monitor. Point is, reconciliation seems to be off the table. And there cannot be reconciliation so long as 70 million people believe they're under verbal, economic, and social attack. So where is this going? A unified society cannot exist if people feel dispossessed, deprived, disenfranchised, and driven to the margins. They have no stake in the society, no part of the society's success, no slice of the pie, no justice, no peace. That's how revolutions are triggered. Look at the public execution of George Floyd in Minneapolis and its nuclear fallout. Likewise, the other half cannot continue in a society if they feel their journalism has been hijacked, their futures, their livelihoods, and even their homes are targets for the Democratic revenge mobs, Madame Lafarge writ large. Their right to recourse in the judicial system to be protected by prosecutors who will sensibly and judiciously demand appropriate bail are now leaving them vulnerable. And if the final recourse to the sacred ballot box becomes vapor, all these rules are changing just before the election. And now the thought police are taking control. From Harvard University, which is debating whether to rescind college degrees, to Silicon Valley, which will judge, filter, and banish speech with the speed of a Chinese Communist Party apparatchik, not to mention an illegal, unconstitutional, and vengeful impeachment designed not to remove a man from office, but to continue reminding 75 million Americans that they're accomplices to an outlaw, which I just heard actually on MSNBC. Half this country demands their version of justice and reform, even at the expense of the other half. But the other half is ready to fight back, and the media can't wait to cash in on the discord. We are in the divided nation. If this does not stop what was once indivisible, it will become a broken bond that is invisible. A house divided cannot stand. Today, our national house is teetering on one limp leg, wounded and dizzy from the battering storms of the last 4 years. To help us explore, we have two of the best minds in the nation. Joining us today, arguably America's most sought-after crisis manager, frequent panelist, Juda Engelmayer. He's actually driving at the moment. Also, my friend and frequent show panelist, Josh Block. Foreign Policy Magazine named him one of the top 100 foreign policy voices. The Forward selected him as one of America's 50 most influential Jews. And Block served as a State Department spokesman and the spokesman for the Clinton-Gore and Gore-Lieberman presidential campaigns. Take it away, Judah. You're a crisis manager. When a crisis, we're in a crisis, go manage it.
Well, I would tell you, first of all, that you're absolutely right. This is a divided nation. The administration and the left is acting as if they won a landslide victory and they have a full mandate. They're completely discounting the 70 million, or half the country, who voted for the other side. Joe Biden's speech was filled with empty words, and the minute he got to the White House, he started undoing every one of the Trump policies that ushered Trump into office, actually, for the promises he made to get into office. And it doesn't make any sense to me how they think they're going to govern over the next 2 years, 4 years, with this divide, but they don't seem to care. They're operating as if it doesn't matter. They're operating as if, like you just said, the CNN is trying to shut off Newsmax, OAN, and all those other, and anything on the right. And I think that the administration and people on the political divide, a part of the political divide, are trying to see to it that anyone who voted for Trump, anyone who supported Trump, anyone on the right hand, slightly to the right of center or further, should not be heard. Their views should be discounted. They should be labeled traitors, if not worse, if not criminals. It's scary, and I don't know how this is going to play out, and I don't think it could last, because I think what's going to happen is at some point you're going to see more of a quote insurrection from the people on the to the right and center right, and further, if they feel they're being ignored. It's a bit of a scary time. I watched Jen Psaki's press conference yesterday. The press throwing her curveballs, and the very first question that was asked of her was whether she's going to be honest, unlike the past administration. It's whether you're honest or not. What are you going to answer to that question? She was given curveball. She's thrown a bunch of curveballs, softballs actually, allowed to answer pretty much inane questions. And in doing so, she also attacked the other side and also talked about the mandate that they have to go forward. And the press just goes along with it. You saw, yesterday when Joe Biden and Jill Biden, Dr. Jill Biden, were standing up there being inaugurated. The press was saying, "What a wonderful family! What a beautiful love story." They're completely rewriting history, completely pretending that we should all be looking at this like some sort of Disney romance and some wonderful thing. They're doing it to the expense of the other side, as if what Donald Trump and Melania had wasn't romantic, it wasn't special, it wasn't anything they could possibly do to destroy the other side, knock them down, and uplift, artificially uplift this side. They're doing. The press is still working hand in hand. You just saw Amazon just put out a notice. They're looking to help Joe Biden now give out the vaccine. Amazon couldn't have offered to help the former administration. The vaccine helps every American. It helps Democrats, Republicans, liberals, socialists, whoever you are, if you're an American, the vaccine helps you. And yet Amazon only made that offer to Joe Biden today. Why? Because he just got inaugurated. It was all about making Trump fail, making Trump look bad, and making anyone on the other side feel like they bet on the wrong horse, so to speak. It's a scary time, and I don't know how it's going to end, but I don't think it could last this way.
Well, it's frightening that you agree with me so completely, because I know that you've seen a lot of crisis. You've worked on all parts of the camera and on all parts of the crisis. And I'm now interested to hear what Josh has to say. Josh, where are you speaking from?
As usual, Edwin, I come to you from outside baseball practice.
Well, I would like to say this. I know both of you are mobile correspondents, but I didn't think that Judah would actually be driving. But go ahead, Josh. Tell us what
Thank you.
Is.
Well, I was struck by both your remarks and Judah's. I think that there's a dynamic at play in which the press, the mainstream press in Washington, the CNNs, MSNBCs, even Fox to an extent, has been part of the narrative of conflict, and Trump is the source of conflict, and he's the source of agitation, and he's the reason that everyone is fighting with each other. And that was to a certain extent true. But it's also the case that politics have become quite vicious and nasty even before Trump was elected president. And so, this notion that Trump was the boogeyman became kind of meme, contagious idea that becomes cultural fact, certainly among the press. And it's like a pressure. The pressure has been let off. The ghoul has left the building. Frankenstein no longer wandering the streets. Whatever you want to say, they've won. Those who were kind of portraying this administration, this previous administration, as aberrant or different or whatever you want to call it, their moment has come. He's gone. They've got back a more appealing figure, one that they can wrap their narrative around and embrace. And I think it's a standard move. There are some interesting things that are taking place. Chuck Schumer is the first Jewish Senate Majority Leader. I mean, it almost snuck by. Nobody noticed. That's a big deal. Kamala Harris is married to a Jewish guy. I think it's the first of the first four or whatever that's a Jew. It's interesting, these things. Now, that doesn't mean that everything is going to be perfect. I do think that what we see societally is something slightly different than what you described, Edwin. I would say that I hear actually a desire for cooperation and a return to normalcy, the normal kind of discourse and discord and fractiousness among the political class, from a lot of mainstream Republicans who are kind of happy that Trump has fled the coop, and now probably, except for his extreme supporters who are going to run for his base, like Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz, who clearly are running for the Trump presidency. These guys have launched their primary campaigns to get that nomination among his constituents, whereas others like Tom Cotton, who broke with him earlier, are pursuing a slightly different course. I think what we're seeing is a split between kind of elites, the establishment, and the anti-elites, anti-establishment. And those forces still exist on the left and on the right, the far left and the far right. I'm concerned that these voices on the far left, which have snuck themselves into the Democratic Party over the last little bit, will try to insinuate themselves more into the mainstream as this kind of relief that the right is gone takes hold. Folks like Ilhan Omar and being brought on to represent Democratic views. These are not representative people. On the other hand, they may try to slip in their ideas as this moves forward and try to portray themselves as representative of something. Some of these, previously fringy ideas that are now part of the mainstream dialogue. And those extremes on the right and the left, they still remain. But the media wants to paper over that narrative and tell a happy story. And in so doing, bring on some of these people in ways that, for them to give this sort of thank goodness he's gone and now we can get together and do normal things again. Well, some of the normal things that they're talking about, are do away with the electoral college and, other extreme ideas that just don't suit American democracy. So we ought to be on alert. It's an interesting time. I think there's a desire for cooperation among certain parties, but the extremes and those who have their agendas are going to use this period to their advantage, and we ought to be on alert about it.
Josh, on that issue, though, the extremes, when Joe Biden mentioned yesterday, he said we have to address white supremacy. He completely ignored the extreme on the left. And that gives them more power to fight, to push their agenda forward over the next 2 years as well.
Agreed. And by the way, that was a criticism, a legit criticism of folks of previous administrations when they would single out, the Obama guys would single out the right wing and not the left, right. And the left and not the right. So we're back to this pattern again. And I think to your point, Jude, the FBI releases statistics every year. And what we know for a fact is that Jews in America have been the number one target of religiously motivated violence in the United States since they started keeping statistics. Not since 2016. Since the 80s and 90s. And I would add for you, that the second most targeted group is, if we are six out of 10, they're 2 out of 10. Okay, and those are Muslims, and that's after 9/11, and all the talk of Islamophobia and all these other things. So anti-Semitism still is an issue, and we do need to get our leaders to focus on it, not ignore it, and treat it with seriousness. And I think that's why people like Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib and others on the left and others on the right who've associated themselves with extreme ideas should not be held up as examples for the country. And we should communicate to the press and others in their party that this is not who we want to see out there. I'm looking forward to seeing Bob Menendez as chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, though. I hope he doesn't want to go back into the nuclear deal.
Well, it's interesting the comments that you give, Josh, and that you give, Judah. I'm beginning to see, first of all, I'd like to agree somewhat with Josh, and I'd like to say that the establishment Republicans are trying to find a rapprochement with the establishment Democrats. And that makes me think there's going to be kind of a four-way tug of war between socialists and the anarchists within the Democratic Party and the Trump and establishment Republicans, kind of a four-way tug of war. But I think that all the progress that Josh has suggested could occur is being negated by the media, because the media wants to emphasize everything that is divisive. We now have we've got about 30 different questions here, and I want to take as many as possible. Thank you both for your opening remarks. We've got, we're going to be calling on you very shortly. We have a watch party in the Villages, Jamie and 3 others, but this is obviously not Jamie. I was a newsman until I retired. Last night, I saw the first White House press briefing. One of the questions was about the color scheme of Air Force One. Air Force One. He writes, no joke. What does this tell us about the marshmallow media coverage of the Biden presidency? I want to start, and I'm determined to find out from Josh and Judah, are we going to find out what Biden's favorite ice cream flavor is or not?
Boxes or briefs? I mean, I think that's the next, the next question, right? To show his vitality. Look, I think that this question, it reminds me of a conversation I once had with a journalist named Mike Siemens, who's an NBC correspondent and was in Florida for many years. And we went to Israel together. He covered the Soviet Union, and this is the kind of question that you get from your stacked house, Pravda reporters. Look, it's a celebratory day, inauguration day. People are in a good mood. I think that's natural. The first press conference you see is not intended to be a battle royale. But your point about, are you going to be more truthful than the last bunch of liars?
But if I could supplement
as a question, Edwin, is a pretty good tell of where the journalists want to go with these things. And again, this question that our friend, the journalist in Florida, is bringing up is again, it's the same example. I do think it's going to be a challenge that the press wants to romanticize this administration and the departure from Trump, and we need to be careful about that.
But I think that, Josh, even though it was the first day, I re-racked the very first press con at the White House on the very first day during the Trump administration.
Well,
they tore him apart.
But again, we can't judge this by that. They came in he came in as a hostile character in a hostile room. You should compare today's press conference to the kind of the first day of Obama or second term Obama, or like a normative one, because this is sort of the return to normalcy in Washington. Biden is a guy who's very well known. He's got very close friends who run the Senate. McConnell this week said that the president did incite that mob. His wife, McConnell's wife, was the first member of cabinet to resign. I think to a certain degree that unless you're running to take over that wing of the party, and it doesn't, and there are crews and doing that, I don't see what the incentive is for Republican leaders to hang on to him and his hostility and his style for so long. And I think when you hear people talking about the change in tone, is that the establishment, the leadership wants to project an ability to get things done and represent their conservatives. And so I think that there's going to be Donald Trump doesn't have that many protectors left. I mean, I did hear Lindsey Graham say, if you turn on Donald Trump, you're turning on yourself. He knows his party better than I do, but I don't think that there's a dramatic desire among Republicans to stand and fight for Donald Trump these days, especially after January 6th. And I don't think, and there's certainly in the media a desire to portray the incoming administration as truthiness reborn.
Okay, let's go to our second question. Thank you, Josh. That was good. And also Judah. This is from Stanley and two others from our watch party in Newton, Massachusetts. That's a place Charles Jacobs knows well. What happened to the so-called riots in 50 state capitals, or was this just a fake to justify the military occupation of our nation's capital? Well, I'll start. I never saw any evidence that 50 capitals from Hawaii to Florida were being threatened. I saw no manifestation of it. I didn't really see a lot of protective measures. It never came to pass, and makes me wonder, based on the history that I have studied, about such emergencies. Judah, what do you say?
Well, first of all, I think a lot of it was hype just to make people a bit more sensitive and keep them in the aggravated mode of January 6th by saying that there's this latent threat going on. I don't think there was any problems in any state capital or anything afterwards. I think there was something happened in Oregon last night. But other than that, I don't think there were any problems on any place else. And I think for a large part, it was preventative, and it was also to keep people on edge and let people know that January 6th isn't over yet. It could still happen to you. It was a way of control. It was a way of controlling people.
Who was behind that manipulative scenario, if in fact that is true that you just suggested?
I mean, who would be the powers that be? I think the governors, I would think the legislatures, the governors, mostly Democratic, and even people who support the incoming administration were putting more pressure on to make sure that things like that don't happen. But I think the news media pushed it further too.
I will before I throw to Josh. It wasn't just. It was Portland, Oregon, which had fire bombs and which had Antifa violence. It was also in Denver and Sacramento, California. And what's interesting is Fox covered it. And to the best of my knowledge, as of this morning, CNN viewership did not even know that this occurred. Josh, what's with this unmaterialized hurricane?
Well, it reminds me of all the predictions, of war, and when Donald Trump moves the embassy, recognizes Jerusalem the capital of Israel, there'll be war. And this, I do think in this case, there was not enough precaution taken before January 6th. I think it's a good idea that we protect the inauguration. Things seemed to go well yesterday. A lot of it was a virtual ceremony, it sounded like. I think that the notion of the media reporting or not reporting these elements of these stories is again a reminder that we need to seek out more sources, and that we are living at a time when there's less top-down inverted pyramid, just sets of facts being provided to you, and more agenda-driven portrayals of what's taking place from a perspective. Just as a media critique for a second, I read a quote, someone quoting Jim Sciutto, a CNN anchor, speaking about Trump's departure from Andrews Air Force Base, saying he's departing with his wings spread like an authoritarian. Making sort of disparaging remarks about him even on the way out of town.
And that's why I'm saying that the media is just stoking this and collecting the rent. Let's go to Melanie.
So I think, right. Yeah. So now the question is, will there be a knee-jerk, Edwin, all the way back to the saccharine of building up a Biden so they can tear him back down? That would be the pattern.
You mean like the old MSNBC Dateline script that was on Dateline once, and they build you up, and then at the last minute they come in with the teardown, right?
Well, that, and look, midterm elections are coming in 2 years, and what's the likelihood that the party expands its base there? I don't, or its hold on these. It depends on what happens. I think with COVID, with China, with foreign policy, with the economy.
Well, you saw what's happened with COVID. The World Health Organization just announced that they're lowering their test standards. I mean, they're raising the test standards so that there aren't going to be that many positives anymore. So now COVID is going to be on the decline officially now that Biden's in office.
And you know what else is interesting? Amazon discovered just today that COVID is afflicting the country, and they offered to help. Which
I think they didn't want to help Oracle with its computational efforts to help the country do well. I think the Amazon and Jeff Bezos such a disdain for the last administration, he was willing to just join some of the computer efforts that were made, but not put the company's full resources to work until just today, huh?
All right, let's get with Melanie in St. Paul. There have been contentious presidential campaigns before. All presidents in recent history have attended the peaceful transfer to a new president. Why did Trump not show that much class? I'll go first. I heard someone, I'm not sure if it was Ari on Fox or who it was, saying, I'm really kind of glad that Trump didn't show up in this, because it would have been an untenable and fake show. It might have been that that Biden would not have tolerated it. This way, Biden was able to assume the leadership without the distraction of Trump being there. So it might have been a forward fumble. And I think we would have had a much less enjoyable inauguration, if I could use that term, if Trump was there. Judah, what say you?
I think Ari Fleischer was dead on. I think what the president's motivations were, I don't know. I don't pretend to speak with him or know what he was thinking. But had he been there, media would have been distracted. They would have kept on panning to him and saying, look, he's rolling his eyes, he's whatever.
Mike Pence is a class act. And,
right.
Here's a guy who did the right thing in the face of a difficult moment, who had his own boss, the president of the United States, basically turn on him. Sounded like maybe he was inciting that crowd to get Pence, who was inside the building presiding over those certifications of those ballots. And yet he stood his ground. He did the right thing. Pence, I think, is an honorable guy. And I was happy to see him representing the Republican Party, the previous administration, at the inauguration. It's not Trump's style to sit there and be calm. He wasn't going to be part of this. I think it was, to your point, better he wasn't there. And in the end, appropriate for Mike Pence, who's been running the government for the last couple weeks anyway.
I noticed that, and well put, Josh. Now let's go to Mickey in Phoenix. I thought the Democrats were against high walls and a militarized police, yet that is exactly what the Democrats called for in Washington. Was this hypocrisy? Josh, go first. You're the Washington guy.
As someone who lives not very far from the site of a lot of that violence and tumult the last few weeks, I don't think it's at all surprising that those who need to make decisions, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, want to secure our federal buildings. Frankly, I was astonished that more was not done in Portland and in other cities where anarchists and others, whoever they were attacking federal courthouses and other buildings, statues. So by whomever's in power. No, I don't take that as a partisan move. I think it's just, if they didn't do that, people would say, well, why aren't you protecting why aren't you holding up your responsibilities like this? So that's my view.
All right. Judah, what do you say?
I agree with you. I think that's a minor issue. I think the fact that people are looking to protect themselves, putting up walls when they think there's a real problem and a real danger is not the worst policy to have. If that's what they genuinely believe, I don't think that's something we should harp on. There are plenty of other issues that are artificial and hypocritical issues we can focus on.
Okay. George in St. Louis writes a long note that I'll boil down to this. Was Antifa involved, or Black Lives Matter, in the events at the Capitol breach? Here's what I say. Well, there was a Black Lives Matter, a significant Black Lives Matter guy who was arrested there, and he was not just there for documentation. He was at the forefront. He was egging people on. And I think there were hidden hands. And we have not yet discovered who those hidden hands were. But the lunatic fringe that we saw, the people with the horns coming out of their hair, and people dressed up with all kinds of schmattes and unbelievable. This lunatic fringe was not Antifa. Antifa does not show their face and put their face on Facebook and Twitter and say, come arrest me. These were nutcases, and I refuse to call it an insurrection because that would dignify it. An insurrection sounds like something political. Maybe a guy would go up to the front and grab the microphone and make a statement or read a declaration. These were just crazy people. It was just a rampage. So I'm not going to share this. Does anyone want to add anything, or are you pretty much agreeing? All right, both vehicles agree. Now let's go to our many questions up here. Here's
honk once or twice if you agree, Edwin.
All right. By the way, Judah, what road are you driving on?
I was on the FDR Drive. Now I'm on Route 4 in Bergen County, New Jersey.
You weren't planning to go into a drive-through and pick up a Whopper, right?
No, I was not. No.
Okay.
That would, if I would have gone to drive, I would have just stopped the car.
Okay. Here's Christine. What is the biggest foreign threat to America Biden will face, and his biggest domestic threat? Listen, everybody. All these presidents, they come in and they immediately get challenged. And I think that the foreign threat will probably be Iran. It will not be North Korea because North Korea is less suicidal than Iran. I think it's going to be Iran. I think that Iran had ideas, and I think that Trump sent over the B-52H model to circle Qatar and put a stop to that. His biggest domestic threat is going to be his own party. I think he's going to be looking at, have to look over his shoulder because the vice president is Kamala Harris, and third in line is Nancy Pelosi. So I think his biggest threat is going to be from his extreme left. Judah, what do you say?
Well, I think that's his biggest political threat. I think the threat to the country, you could also say, is going to be the disenfranchised Trump voters as well. And he should look out for that in terms of a threat as well. But foreign policy, I think Iran and China are the biggest problems that we're looking at. However, he sees China as a friend and he's going to cozy up to them. And Iran, I don't know what he's going to do on the nuclear deal, but I do agree that Iran's going to become a problem, or is a problem already, and is going to get bigger.
Now, before Josh comes in, I would like to say that Tony Blinken, the foreign secretary,
Right.
Secretary of State, is turning some heads. He said, I'm not rushing into the Iran nuclear deal. And I thought, I believe it was Ted Cruz, questioned him and say, do you believe that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel? And are you keeping the embassy there? And he said, yes and yes. So I do think that we may see some better developments, foreign relations, than we had feared. But I think that the military threat from Iran and the subversive threat from China are going to be big. Josh, what do you say?
Democrats have a lot to prove on foreign policy. There's no question about it. Like or dislike Donald Trump, he was right about China. It's bipartisan in Congress now to get tough on China. We'll see what this administration wants to do, but people in Congress are not happy with China. They just got smacked this week for the way they're treating the Uyghurs. It's a genocide. That's on top of the trade issues and other things. So I think tough on China will continue, and it will. That I think will be the biggest foreign policy challenge, along with Iran in a way, although they're related to a certain extent, because oil and Iran and Chinese finance and illegal smuggling are all intertwined. But the big challenge, I think, is the near to midterm great power competition that the United States is now engaged in with primarily China, but also with Russia. Hypersonic missiles, space, cyber, quantum computing and unbreakable codes, directed energy lasers, stuff that we're really not thinking about today, but that will define whether or not we are the leader of the free world, or as leader of the free world have the power to keep our adversaries in check. And the truth is that our technological and economic boom of Silicon Valley the last 25 years was in part born out of our relationship with Israel, where companies would go over and buy up small companies and technologies for 40 million or 400 million, and they'd make them part of their big companies and they would be successful. AOL's Instant Messenger as just one example, and there are so many. I think the United States is not going to win that great power competition, which is rooted in technology, with its traditional Five Eyes relationships. It's not New Zealand that's going to help us, beat the Chinese in outer space.
All right, now
so
just
deepening our relationship with Israel. If Biden faces those major foreign policy crises and doesn't build on the Abraham Accords and deepen our relationship with Israel to win that great power competition and stabilize the Middle East under the direction that's already happened, they'll be making a terrible mistake. So I hope that's certainly they prove their mettle and their wisdom by pursuing that, which of course requires a tough approach to Iran.
Now, Josh, you were a spokesman for the State Department, correct?
Yeah, for USAID.
Okay, so I hope everybody listened carefully to what Josh said about hypersonic missiles, directed energy lasers, probably nano was in your mind.
Yeah, nano and micro. Nano is one part. Micro technology is the use of those nano pieces to make slightly larger and more directed parts. So
Right.
That's the new thing.
And they can swarm. Would you tell people what you meant when you said Five Eyes and New Zealand is one of the Five Eyes? Not everyone understood that.
Sure. The United States has a special agreement with let's call it the major English-speaking powers of the world: Australia, New Zealand, England, Canada, and the United States. And together we make up what we call the Five Eyes, and we share information globally that we pick up through signals intelligence and in other venues to secure the free world, if you will. And we've relied on that intelligence apparatus for a long time, but it may be that intelligence apparatus is slightly too small to accomplish the kinds of things we need to do among the families of democracies, among the leaders of intelligence technology, in terms of beating these command economies of China and Russia as they pursue, these are Edwin. These are things that we would have read about in science fiction books, but are coming true. Directed energy weapons from orbiting spaceships or from satellites that are capable of obliterating large things. These are becoming real. Hypersonic flight. That's flight of a missile or an airplane, whatever, faster than sound, certainly, and faster than other missiles can go to intercept them.
Well, it's going to go 7 times. Is it 7 or 15 times the speed of sound?
Well, there are varying standards. Quantum computing, which is really about unbreakable codes. The race to get to a point where you can employ that stuff in meaningful ways. Satellites and anti-satellite warfare. The Russians at the moment are maneuvering their surveillance drone right up behind some of ours. We're behind some of these areas of technology. And the race for the moon, the race for Mars. I don't think. Remind me, Edwin, has the United States ever landed something on the dark side of the moon?
No, but China did. That's right.
And China is again it has a Canadian economy. They're putting enormous resources into these things. It's wonderful that we have Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos with Blue Origin and SpaceX. But and there's certainly a creative economy that's burgeoning out there for the space business. But this long-term battle over who has supremacy in these key elements of global power over the next 50, 70 years and longer is being played out now. And the United States needs Israel more than ever before. And so one hopes that no matter what takes place inside this Biden administration, they understand that grand challenge and the importance of integrating Israel deeper into those technological and intelligence and other systems, because again, it's not going to be Australia or New Zealand. God bless them. They have wonderful space programs and other things. They're going to help us out of our engineering problems, or the British or the Canadians that we need to beat the Chinese.
All right. Now, we've just got a note from Chris in British Columbia. Chris says that CNN, not on the TV, but at least on its website, did cover the Portland demonstration. Chris, if that's the case, could you put in the chat what time did you see that CNN website? So we'll wait for that. Let me get to the next question here. Samantha Coral Gables. At the inauguration, did the young poet read a phrase that said, "might made right," or anything along those lines? Yes, I believe that's the case. I have it here, actually. I don't know why I printed this out. She had beautiful delivery. If we merged mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy. So I'll just leave it there. She did actually say those words, and that's context in which she said them. Now I've got a question here. We're skipping around. That was answered. If Trump was so bad, why did he start no new wars? How many new wars will Biden start? And he reminds us that Bernstein wrote a book called Obama's Wars. I'm going to leave that one to Josh. Josh, what about it? He didn't start any wars. He ended a few, or he wound down a few. Are we better for it? Are we weaker, or what?
So I think honestly they get pretty good grades on some of the foreign policy choices he made, especially when they went against the establishment. Putting pressure on NATO and our NATO allies was very unpopular, but it turned out to be the right choice, and they're more engaged in NATO with us now. Putting pressure on the Chinese and exposing some of the areas and challenging them. Do you remember the notions of the sky would fall if we were to say something to China about the debt ratios and the bonds? It didn't happen, and it's now bipartisan to go ahead with that stuff. The Abraham Accords has the Middle East on a footing where Israel and 6 or 7 now 8 Arab states are creating a GCCI, if you will, an Arab world plus Israel that'll be a stabilizing force in that region. So I think there are a lot of things that Democrats will be smart to build on coming out of that foreign policy record. That being said, there are new dangers, and those dangers can be self-inflicted, like rushing back into an Iran deal without insisting on, better conditions or signaling weakness, or they can be just, bad instincts and bad decision making internally. So we'll have to see what happens. But I hope that they'll get on the right course.
Oh, I think that one of the spectacular versions of war that Trump did was with North Korea. Basically, North Korea had figured out how to explode a bomb. They had the guidance control, they had the distance, they could have hit us with one problem. They did not have a warhead that could survive reentry into the atmosphere. If they would have gone that one extra step, and that's what testing was needed for, to develop the metals to withstand reentry into the upper atmosphere, then we would have had to preemptively attack. 60,000 people would have died in the first hour from all those cannons. And so that's my thought. That now I have a note here from Wes in the Bay Area. He says the comment about Amazon is false. You can find references to their offer to help distribute vaccines dating back to at least January 7th, while Trump was in charge. There was no response from the White House, and this was reported on in December as early as the 11th. So
you stand corrected. Thank you.
All right. And here's another one from Wes. Wes, a smart guy. He knows good food. Important, he says, there was no plan or project on national vaccine coordination from the Trump administration. This, according to reports for the transition team, just an empty binder. This was shameful, was it not? And so let me opine right here. I think that what Trump did with the Operation Warp Speed has never been done in the history of mankind. We had millions of doses. It's an absolute crime that these doses were not administered, that the states and the governors and the counties each had their own priority list, and we weren't ready. And I can't understand why we weren't ready. And this is really the responsibility of these governors. It's a scandal of major proportions. Do you have anything to add to that, Judah or Josh?
It's a state issue, like you said, and I think that there are states that have been thrown out vaccines or keeping people waiting in line because they don't meet certain criteria at this point is a little absurd. And I think there should be a better way. At the end of each day, if there's enough vaccine left over, they should let 100 people stand in line and get it and keep on going, because eventually everyone's gonna have to get it anyway. And it's been rolled out very poorly. Some states are doing it much better than others, but the coastal states, in New Jersey, New York, are not doing it that well.
I mean, I don't understand why they just didn't go by the birthday. The oldest guy gets it first, and the second oldest guy gets it second. They could have a mobile van, and the mobile van could administer this. Josh, do you have a thought about this?
There have been a lot of complications to this, just because the vaccine has to be kept at such a cold temperature, and because multiple doses of the vaccine are required. You're only 50% protected after you get the first Pfizer at best. And after the first Moderna dose, you're up to 80% covered. But again, that leaves a 20% gap and a 50% gap. We're going to need a lot more rigorous testing if this is how this continues. I don't think that there's any guarantee that we're going to get 100 million people vaccinated in 100 days. I hope that happens. I really think that we need a much more robust testing and surveillance process so that it becomes easier. I mean, how are you going to get people to go back to work? People need to get hundreds of people going back into office buildings in Manhattan.
Right.
How's that going to work?
I was just there. It's not happening yet, so it's scary.
Right. Well, what's going to give people the confidence to want to go there? It's not just
the confidence that they're not going to get sick, that the place is clean, that everyone else besides them are vaccinated. That's what's going to do it. But it's not going to happen.
Or that they're negative, because it's not. You can't be sure that everyone's had the vaccine.
Right.
And we're going to end up. You have to make sure somehow that the people are tested negative. There's a whole.
All right. In a word, Josh, if everything goes well, which it's not going to, when would we get back to something called normal? In a word.
How can anyone know that?
Spring of 22, and with some kind of spring, middle of 22.
What do you say, Judah?
Normal is depending how you interpret it. I know a lot of companies now that have decided that if working online has been working, they don't need full office space anymore. They need half office space, rotating offices on a regular basis. So people are going to get used to a new normal soon. You know, you want to get people back to work, but I think the way that's going to look is going to look very different.
Okay, so here's a note from Charles in Boston. The ADL, the Jewish Defense Organization, he puts that in quotes, only fights one of the four sources of Jew hatred: Islamists, black nationalists, and the radical left. It's as though we're attacked on four borders, but only one border is being attended to. He says, what should Jews be doing as we move forward in this environment where now we've empowered, if I could add to his question, we've empowered an anti-Semitic core within the Democratic Party, AOC, spreading lies about Israel, not giving vaccine. Actually, that was Omar and the squad, and working to discredit Israel. What do you say, Josh?
Well, these guys are a problem. And it's why we need to see the rest of the Democratic Party and Joe Biden stand up and define what he wants his administration to be. I mean, who's the leader of the Democratic Party? Is it going to be AOC, or is it going to be Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and the President of the United States? If he wants to be bullied by a bunch of anti-Semitic backbenchers from places where they may get away with supporting Hezbollah or talking about Jews as bloodsuckers or calling Nita Lowey, whatever name she called her, they can do that. But I think that what we'll find out is that Tony Blinken and President Biden and Kamala Harris will not really much like those views. I mean, unless Kamala Harris thinks that she's going home every day to a bloodsucker, I think she's not going to like so much hearing those people talk shit about Jews.
All right, Judah, very, very quickly. Do you have a comment about that?
Well, my comment is that while I agree that they don't want to hear people talk badly about Jews, I think that there's a special place in the left for them. They're trying very hard to placate them and not lose them. At the same time, they don't want to buy completely into what they're saying. So they need to find that balance, Josh, and I don't know how they're going to do it. But you're not going to hear them speaking bad about the other side yet, or about the extreme left. They're just going to maybe cool the temperature down a little bit, but they're not pushing as hard as they're pushing against the other side. And I don't know.
It's a long-term problem.
Well, it's a long-term problem,
and it's worse, right? It's worse because there's going to be more of these people coming up. The Justice Democrats that got these guys elected, that we ran a screen test of 400 people to find AOC has not given up. Now, they didn't do very well in the midterms.
Right.
But, to your point, I agree. It's not going away, but, hopefully they'll get ignored.
I would just like to add that the ADL that you and I and Judah knew, Josh, Judah, and Edwin knew back in the day is not the ADL of today. Back in Foxman's day, back when Abe Foxman was Abe Foxman, no one could get away, no public official could get away with these sorts of bloodsucker statements.
Now it's become kind of a sounding board for the progressive left, which scares me about the ADL.
All right. So here's one from Rita in Century City. What will happen with the FBI investigation into Hunter Biden and the big guy's involvement with China and the Ukraine? I'm going to wait like 10 seconds, and then I'm going to say, Judah, where's it going?
0.
Could you show us that goose egg again?
Yes, exactly. It's not a priority. It's not going to be a priority, and I think you'll hear some rumblings about it from certain people, but eventually it's not going to go anywhere, and is it going to say there was no there?
All right, let's see what Josh has to say. Is it a 0 or a 0?
I think the country is most of the country has lost its appetite for the most outlandish of these political accusations and witch hunts. I think that they want to get back to using the special counsel and these investigative tools for serious issues and less for political purposes. And I think you're likely to see the Biden guys not try to invoke the use of special counsel and these things in their Justice Department, and hopefully that'll get reset the level of normal.
So you're going to say that Durham is just going to disappear?
This investigation, you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just think it's going to. Yes, I do. I think it'll just peter out, and that'll be that.
Okay. Here's a question from Thomas in London. I heard Edwin criticize the entire publishing industry. Aren't you afraid of being canceled by all your publishers?
Didn't that happen a long time ago, Edwin?
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, Thomas, no way. I'm not afraid of any of these guys. Last week, my book was #2 in Barnes and Noble and a top 10 at Amazon, and I'm not afraid. Don't worry.
If the book publishers, Edwin, didn't need authors, there would be no authors, right?
Right.
Yeah. I wish the book publishers today were even a fraction of what they were when I started out 50 years ago. Okay. Celine in Los Angeles. That's not far from Rita. Now that the cancel culture and revenge movements are emboldened, will the Jew haters be going against supporters of Israel and Jews on the campus? I say yes. And I say that one of our sponsors is Emmet, excellent organization, as is Stand With Us. And just this morning, I was reading that there's a professor there who says, how can I give a good grade to a Jew who is also a believer in Zionism? And I think that we're going to have to triple our strength during this period, because now when you've got Harvard students wanting to cancel degree of Alan Dershowitz, Ted Cruz, and others, and of course they've just booted off Stefanik from advisory commissions, I think it's going to take all the talents, all the skills, and all the intelligence of the pro-Israel and pro-Jewish community to fight back against the falsities of what's on campus. Josh, what do you...
Not just on campus, Edwin. I mean, the last time I checked, you had members of Congress accusing other members of Congress of being money-grubbing Jews.
That's right, and they're in the Democratic Party. Is that not
And then the
correct?
Democratic Party refused to censure that person.
Right.
That's right, and
They
Democrats
came back with an All Lives Matter resolution. I remember
Yeah,
how the Black Lives Matter felt.
They were going to try to make an anti-Semitism resolution, and they couldn't bring themselves to it.
You know, when people started saying, no, not Black Lives Matter, but All Lives Matter. Do you remember how the BLM movement reacted?
Yep.
Not real well.
Not real
Well,
So
well.
the Jews when the Jews said, hey, you know, they're being singled out, the community came back with, not with, okay, good. They came back with everyone matters.
And I know why the Black community didn't want to be negated when they said Black Lives Matter. They didn't want to hear anyone water it down and say all lives matter. But I must say this, as Judah and Josh and I and many others know, that every day, maybe every hour of every day, we hear about another outrageous anti-Semitic activity on campus, on Twitter, on Facebook. I just heard yesterday at the Paul School of Law that they were trying to force an Orthodox Jew to eat a pork pizza. And it's unlimited what is happening here. All right, we're running late, but I'm happy because we've got great questions. Aaron in Madison, if the House is divided, what would an utter collapse look like? How would it start? Well, I say that California and New York are losing lots and lots of residents. They're moving to other states like Texas and Arizona and Florida. And I think there have been some secession efforts there. And I think you might find that when things become very, very bad, these secession efforts like Texit, which is in New York, and Flexit, which is trying to get off the ground in Florida, might actually make a declaration. Nat Lewin says, if that occurs, he said very clearly, send in the troops. Judah, what do you think it's going to look like if it looks like anything? Or is it nothing?
I'm not going to say it's nothing, but I don't know what it's going to look like. But I think that you will have, I mean, secession seems like a big issue, and I don't think it's coming to that just yet. I think that that what you're going to have is a lot of people yelling, screaming, clamoring, protesting on the streets, peacefully protesting, I hope. I don't see it coming to a physical war of ammunition yet and seceding just yet. But Can it get that way? If it keeps on going downhill, yes. But if somebody grabs a hold of it and realizes that they've gone too far and maybe bring us back to the center, then no. I don't see it being that dire in the immediate future.
All right, here's a note from Talia in Israel, and she's from Othniel. Do you know where Othniel is, Josh, in Israel?
I can picture it, but I can't describe it for you.
All right. Something tells me they have a lot of hummus and tahina there. I think I know the spot.
Yeah, it's on one side of the fence to the other.
Yeah. What do you suggest is the solution regarding the media tendency of divisiveness? I'm going to answer this right now, and I'm going to give it to Judah and Josh. They can't help themselves. Their guide came in yesterday, and it was nothing but more divisiveness from the left, from the right, from CNN, from OAN, from Fox, everybody against everybody. I think that it's going to be years, maybe 5 years, before new and legitimate mainstream or alternative stream or news stream media comes to the fore. And until that time, we're going to have confusion. Judah, you deal with the media all the time.
Listen, we're a free market, and media is nothing but not commercialized and retail oriented in that sense. And if people collectively tune out or choose another source, media will change their ways. As long as people want to hear an echo chamber of their own personal beliefs and nothing else, these media folks will thrive.
Okay. Here's a question, a pretty interesting one from Maxine in Dallas. Edwin Black has written about IBM and the Holocaust and their 6 steps: identification, exclusion, pauperization, ghettoization, deportation, and then extermination. Relate that to what we are seeing now, because we already have identification, exclusion, and pauperization. Well, I will just, we're not anywhere close to camps in this country, but I will say that in 1938, the Carnegie Institution, I wrote about this in my book, War Against the Weak, had hatched a fascist arrangement with the governor, Wilbur Cross of Connecticut, to go door to door, identify all the people that they thought were eugenically unfit, and which they thought would be 90%, seize their property, deport them to the Ozarks, and eventually subject them to euthanasia programs. That was in 1938. And they started the project in Rocky Hill, Connecticut. And it didn't go any further than one town because Wilbur Cross was voted out of office. But I personally am not making any jumps to the very next step. I'm taking one step at a time. And we do have identification. That's instantaneous now. We do have exclusion with the cancel culture. 3, we do have pauperization with people, their livelihood being challenged and they're being thrown out of the profession and things of that nature, similar to what we saw in the 30s. And I will say that when people lose their homes and lose their way of life, and they could even be thrown out through expropriation or eminent domain, they will tend to gather, and they will tend to go to other types of concentrated areas, neighborhoods, etc. Judah, what do you think about this prospect? You know the topic.
Well, I think that as soon as they start coming for the guns and ammunition and the Second Amendment, then everything else is going to follow.
So you think that that's our code?
Listen, I think that, I don't want to get into a debate on the Second Amendment here, but you know that before any revolution starts, what the governing bodies try to do is take the weapons off the streets. Once they legalize those, then people start worrying about everything else that's coming down the pike. But like you said, I don't think we're there yet. And then, I think that we have a ways to go, and there are still good people in the government who lead over us who don't want to see that happen. And I'm hoping that those heads will prevail over the negativity.
And I would like to interject before I go to Josh, because Josh knows this topic too. I'd like to say that this guy from PBS, we saw him on the video saying he wants to take the children away from the Republicans and put them in re-education camps. And we've got Katie Kirk, and we've got the guy from the Washington Post and others talking about reprogramming millions of Trump supporters. Josh, what do you say about this?
I just think people need to dial down the rhetoric in general. The Trump period had people really spun up. His language was out of the ordinary. I remember an interview, it may have been Katie Couric who was interviewing him. She says, "But you call women cunts." And he says, "No, just Rosie O'Donnell." And everybody laughs and like, that was
No,
it.
that wasn't
Yeah,
Katie Couric. That was Megyn Kelly.
Right.
Thank you. Okay, well, just the coarseness of the language of the last handful of years needs to recede. And I think as that happens in every quarter, we'll begin to do better. I was a campaign specialist, strategist, manager, press secretary who specialized in attacked campaigns. But the kind of attack politics we've been seeing, which is unceasing and doesn't have a particular policy point, is simply about destroying the other side, is not healthy. And I hope we begin to see the end of it. And I hope some of those thoughts are reflective of that, Edwin, that's what happens.
Okay, let's see. I have another question here. Desi in Pueblo. I'm thinking that's Pueblo, Colorado. Is it not true that America's Civil War will first see a civil war in both the Republican and Democratic parties? Absolutely. Schumer was already hinted at that he would be primaried by AOC. Liz Cheney has already been notified that as a result of her vote for impeachment, that she would be primaried in 2022. So I think that these two civil wars are part of the larger civil war. And that's very common, whether it's the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks, whether it's the Balkanization. There's always a multiplicity of civil wars, power grabs. Judah, what do you say? You know history.
I know history, but I think the Civil War will begin with the political side. And I think that there's going to be a problem. The Republicans are going to face a problem immediately. And Josh pointed this out, that there are people like the Ted Cruz of the world and Josh Hawleys who are trying to take over the Trump era. But then you have the mainstream Republicans who might not have loved everything out of Trump's mouth, who might want to find somebody else, which means that the Republicans are going to be split and the Democrats are going to stay together. And I think what you're looking at is you're going to have, I think there could very well be violence on the right to try to solidify who's going to be in power control, because they don't want to just leave it so that the Democrats win again. And I think you're going to have a lot of people fighting for that supremacy in politics. I don't know if that answers the question, but.
Okay. I'm just reminded by Eve in Long Island that, as I said in my opening remarks, Eve might have not been watching, that this PBS attorney was promptly fired from NPR for talking about camps. That doesn't matter that he was fired. He had the idea.
It does matter he was fired. It shows that the organization behind them didn't support that necessarily, or felt that was a little too far. I think it does matter that if he wasn't let go, that would suggest something else. Just because someone has a crazy opinion, everyone's got crazy opinion. A lot of people have crazy opinions. I think if the organization would have backed him, it would have been more of a problem.
Okay.
This, I think, is the important point, Edwin, because in a period in which anything went when because of the politics demanded it, people got away with those things. But as institutions begin to say, you know what, there are boundaries and we expect our own people to behave and to stay within those boundaries, we get back to a point of where the discourse, the civil discourse, is maybe more along the lines of the one that we remember from prior years.
Okay, I've got Giuliano in Brazil. I'm sorry we can't get to you now. We'll try to get you another time. I've got many others. I've got Manny in Chicago with the final question, because we're getting late. I know Eve is going to complain that we're going too long. Manny in Chicago, where does Trump go from here? Well, the first thing that I'm going to say is that right about now, you're going to start hearing all kinds of Elvis stuff. Elvis is alive. He's doing this. He's doing that. And I would listen to all that stuff with the new party, with the Patriot Party, with the network, with a huge grain of salt. And I think we need to be very careful. I personally think that Trump is going to be pursued by the federal authorities. I think he's going to be pursued by U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York and possibly other jurisdictions. vengeance is on their mind. And so we don't really know where Trump goes from here. Judah, what do you say?
I think that if they do pursue Trump legally from various different fronts, you will have his base get more angry, and that could provoke some of the I guess the potentiality for more civil disobedience. And I hope they choose not to, but I think that you're right. Vengeance will take priority, and it's not going to be necessarily federal. I think the states, because that way, even if Biden wanted to try to pardon him to make peace, he couldn't do it.
I should have mentioned the state's attorney of the attorney general of the state of New York. Josh, you have the last word. Where do you think Trump goes from here?
I think Biden doesn't really want to see more divisiveness. On the other hand, he doesn't want to stomp on the wheels of justice. Republicans have a very sensitive and very careful row to hoe here. McConnell, again, having laid responsibility for the events of January 6th at the president's very own feet, and there not being that many people to defend the president against that kind of stuff, balanced against the point that you made, Edwin, which affects both parties. You don't want to do too much to antagonize them, because you'll end up solidifying this. The one thing that can unite the right, is this kind of attack. Unless you can really split the Republican Party against him and have it be like a big catharsis and a flushing of the toilet, which I do not see happening, you're just going to exacerbate a division there, and they're really not going to want to go along with it. So I think people need to be very careful as we go ahead in terms of what their expectations are in terms of vengeance. I don't think we're likely to see a lot of it.
All right, we've had a great show with a lot of questions. I'm sorry we couldn't take more. We simply ran out of time. We ran 25 minutes over. Maybe we'll cover more of this in future shows. I'll see everybody here next week at 3 p.m. Eastern. Until then, head over to any Barnes & Noble in the United States or any Amazon platform in 190 countries across this planet, where you can find any of my 200 book editions, such as IBM and the Holocaust, War Against Weak, and Financing the Flames. Get passwords and access to participate live in future shows at theedwinblackshow.com. You'll see a much enhanced and produced version of this show and prior episodes. We're up to episode 19 now, by subscribing to our YouTube channel at The Edwin Black Show and click that notification button. Follow me at Edwin Black Book on Twitter and Facebook. I am now zooming out. Thank you, everyone.